Today, I'm going to show you how to use Blender, not that one, to create environments for your short film. Let's get started. For my environment, I am going to be using some assets from the Quixel Megascans library, and we're also going to be using a plugin that is going to allow us to batch import those into Blender. So I'm going to show you the process to get that all set up first, and then we'll start creating our environment. So to start, you're going to want to find an environment on the Quixel library that you want to use. For my environment, I'm going to be using the African slate quarry. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Then I'm going to click on download. And then you can choose between a couple different qualities right here. I typically choose the medium quality. That seems to be enough for what I'm doing. So I'm going to click on download right there, and that's going to download my environment that has all the textures, models, things that we're going to need to create our custom environment. Once we have those downloaded, we are going to need to install a Blender add-on made by the guys over at Lightcraft. They are the ones that also make Jetset, which we are going to be using with this model. So huge shout out to them for creating both these things and making my life a million times easier. I'll put a link down below to the tutorial on their website for using this plugin. You can go ahead and download it if you would like, but I'll just run through it real quickly so that you can follow along. Now that we've got our model downloaded and we've got the add-on script downloaded, we're gonna go ahead and open up Blender and install that add-on. So you're gonna go up here to Edit, and you're gonna go down to Preferences. Now we are looking for the Add-ons tab. Mine's already on there. You're gonna come up here to this little arrow in the top right, and we are going to choose Install from Disk. Then we are going to navigate to your downloads, and you're gonna look for that batch asset importer right there. Click Install from Disk, and we should be good to go. We can go ahead and close that. All right, to start using that add-on that we just installed, you're gonna come up here and click this little arrow. That will open up the sidebar, and then you should see an option for Batch Import down here on the right-hand side. Once we click on that, it's going to tell us that we need to save our file. Go ahead, click Save File. And then I would recommend saving this into a folder where you're going to store all of your assets. That way we can link to one folder and just build a big set of all your assets. I'm going to call this one Slate Quarry. Go ahead and click Save. Save again. Now we're ready to link to the Quixel assets that we downloaded earlier by clicking on this little folder right here at the top. So click on that. Go to your downloads, look for the folder that you downloaded. I have both low and mid. We're just going to click mid, click accept, click accept. That's going to link to all those assets. Now you have your settings down below. I like to use displacement, so I'm going to click on that. Then I'm going to click on import assets. But once that is done, you can go down here to the bottom left-hand corner, click on this little arrow, and we can switch over to our asset browser. Let me go ahead and drag this up so we can see it a little bit better. And then you can change to your current file right there. You can see all the materials and models have been imported. You can switch between those right here. But now we are ready to start building our environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file. So we're just going to go File, New, General. We can go ahead and click Save. That's going to save those assets so we can keep using them. Go ahead and go back to our asset browser. We want to find the folder that we just created. If you do not see that folder right now, we need to go ahead and add it as one of our asset libraries. So you're going to come up here, you're going to click Edit, go down to Preferences, then we're going to go to File Paths right there at the bottom. Then you should see this option for Asset Libraries. We're going to click that plus button. Now you want to navigate to where you saved that last file so we can properly link to it. Once you've gotten to the folder from where you saved it, go ahead and click Add Asset Library. This will bring you back here, and now you should see your library linked. You can go ahead and close that window. Then if we come down to our asset library, you should have a new option for the folder you just selected. And I can see right here, there's my South African slate quarry that we just created. So I'm not going to go through a full tutorial on how to use Blender. I'm just going to cover the basics to get you started. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to delete this cube. The way we delete things inside of Blender is by pressing X. So go ahead and press X. It'll give you an option. Just click delete. Now our cube's gone. To move around our view, you are going to press the middle mouse button and hold down. That is how you are going to orbit around your scene. Then if we want to zoom in and out, you are just going to use your scroll wheel, scroll up and down. That will zoom you in and out. And lastly, if you hold down Shift and then click the middle mouse, that is how we actually move side to side, up and down. And between those three movements, you should be able to get all the different angles you need for working on your models. So just remember scroll, middle mouse, and shift middle mouse, and that's going to get you those basic navigation controls inside of Blender. Okay, so now to start building my scene, I like to start by dragging out one of these models of the ground. Right now it's going to just look like a gray kind of solid object. That's because we are not previewing our materials. So up here in the top right of Blender, you have your different viewport shading options. So you have wireframe, you have solid, you have material preview, and you have rendered. So if you want to see what this is going to look like, choose either material preview or the rendered option, and those will show you a better representation of what it's going to look like. Material preview is going to run faster on your machine while you're working, so probably choose that one if things start to get slow. Now that we've got that model placed into our scene, we have a couple things we can do next. We can move it around, we can scale it up, we can rotate it, or we can just duplicate it or add other objects. Let me walk through each of those options just to show you how to do each one, and then we'll go on from there. Blender loves to use shortcut keys, so I'm going to go through each of those for you. The first one being move. In order to move objects inside of Blender, we're going to press G on the keyboard. Makes perfect sense. G for move. I don't know why you wouldn't get that. Once you press G, you can go ahead and move your mouse around, and that's going to move your object freely, just in all directions. If you would like to move it on one axis, you can press the key for that axis. So if I want to move it just along the Z, I can press the Z key on my keyboard, and I will only move up and down. If I want to move it on the X, I can press X, and I'll move it kind of forwards and backwards. And then if I want to move it on the Y, I can press Y, and that'll move it side to side. When you are done moving it the way you want, make sure you click your mouse button again, and that will confirm the move and keep it where it's at. If you don't like what you're doing, you can just right click and that'll cancel it, as well as you can press escape. The other thing you can do is you can rotate it. So R for rotate, this one actually makes sense. It's just going to rotate it on all the different axes. Once again, you can press X, Y, or Z to rotate along any one of those axes like that. The last thing Now that you can move, rotate, the last thing you could do is scale. So if we press S for scale, then you're going to move your mouse to the side to scale it larger, move it towards the center to scale it smaller. And we can make this pile of rocks any size that we want. Just like with moving and rotating, you can also scale along the different axes. So if I press X, it'll scale on the X, Y will scale on the Y, right? And Z will scale on the Z. It gives you kind of some interesting results. Now that you know how to move, scale, rotate your objects, there's one last thing I want to show you before you get started, and that's how to duplicate objects. So if you click on any object here on the screen, you can press Shift D and it will create a copy that it'll let you immediately start moving, and then you can click and it'll create that duplicate wherever you place it. This is a little bit easier than dragging from the bottom every time you want a new copy. But it is not necessary. You can continue to drag out from the bottom if you would like. However, you will not maintain the changes you have made. So if we've already scaled this object, you may want to duplicate it instead of dragging out a fresh copy from the bottom. Now that I've shown you how to duplicate objects, we are ready to start building our scenes. I'll walk you through kind of the beginning of my scene, and then I'll fast forward till I'm completed, where I will then show you how to set it up for filming inside of Jetset. Let's start building. So I have these three things here. If I rotate, I can see that this one is actually down below. So I'm going to move that back up, that they're a little more equal. And I'm just going to piece by piece start building kind of a ground that we can use for our film. All right, let's jump in right here real quick, just so you guys can see the progress I'm making. So far, I've been placing in a bunch of these different ground planes. I made a big one over here, and then I'm using these kind of rock mountains to surround my scene, almost create like a backdrop. That way you don't just have an endless view out into the abyss. I like to zoom in sometimes and just look around my scene as if we were kind of standing in it to see what it would look like once we get on camera. In this case, I think it's starting to come together pretty good. I've got sort of this like rock riverbed. I'm just going to continue building some of these around the outside. I think it's best if you can get a full 360 kind of enclosure so you don't have any empty spots. It'll allow us to get some really cool shots with a lot of camera movement, because we'll make sure that we always have something to be seen in the back of our shots. So let's keep building, and I'll jump in as I get towards the end. All right, let's jump back in again. Let me show you guys where I'm at. I've now added in kind of these bigger boulders over here on this left side. I still got the original mountain here with kind of this riverbed coming out. I've added a larger one here on the right. I've added kind of these dunes here. As I was looking around, I think I like the way this is looking. I think this is the only direction that you can still kind of see out. So I'm just going to probably place a big stretched out plane over there just so it looks like the environment extends on and on. Now you can see there's kind of a stretch of sand or dirt going in all the directions. I am not a professional environment builder. This is just kind of what I think looks best. You can build your worlds however you want. So now that we have our environment built, the last thing I like to do is add in a sky so that we do not just have this gray boringness around our scenes. So we're going to use something that is called an HDRI. There's a bunch of different places you can get these. I like to use a website called Polyhaven. Everything on here is free. They have a bunch of different HDRIs to choose from. So let's go ahead and look through what they have. Look through their offerings, and let's find one that fits our scene. So here on the home page, I'm just going to scroll down to HDRIs, click on that. All right, so I'm just going to scroll through here and find one that looks good for my scene, and then I'll jump back. All right, so I found this one called Quantani Moon Noon. Looks pretty similar to mine. I like the look of it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit download on this. Go ahead and allow if you're in Safari. And now we can go ahead and add that HDRI to our environment. So inside of Blender, now that we have our HDRI, we want to add it to our world. So we're going to come over here to the right-hand side of Blender. We're going to click on that world tab there on the right-hand side. Then over here where it says color, go ahead and click on that. And we are looking for this environment texture. Once we click on that, you can click open, head to your downloads, look for that .exr file, go ahead and click open image. Now, if we want to preview what that's going to look like, we can switch over to our rendered view, and this is going to give you that sky that you just downloaded, and it's going to actually light your scene using the same lights that were in that image. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like in my scene. I think overall this is going to look awesome. It makes it look a lot more realistic than just having the gray sky. I just love HDRIs because they also light your environment, so then your sky and your environment looks very similar, looks a little more cohesive. Now that we've finished building our model, something we're going to want to check is the scale of everything. A lot of times when you're building your model, you don't realize just how big or small each piece is. So at the very end, I like to come back in and check everything just to make sure it's going to look exactly how I want it to when I start filming. So the way I like to do that is just by creating a cube. So if I go ahead and press Shift A for that add again, we can come up here to mesh and we can go to cube. When you add that cube in, it's going to look either really big or really small. In our case, it's pretty big. We can click on this little arrow over here to confirm, but it should be 2 meters all the way around, or roughly 6.5 feet if you measure things in feet like I do. So now looking at my model, and I can see if this is 6.5 feet, that means my model is really, really small. Basically, if I put an adult standing right here, he is going to be taller than almost everything in the entire scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my collection over here. Let's make sure we don't select our cube, so I'm going to just drag that all the way up there to the top. Then click the one right underneath it, scroll all the way down, hold Shift, and then now we can start to scale up our scene. So always make sure you check your scale before you're finished, just to make sure you don't have to come back and do it again. Now that we've got the scale all figured out, it's time to add our scene locators. The way I like to describe scene locators is they are points we're going to place around our model that are spots we plan to film at. So basically, where do you want the camera to be sitting when you come film on this model? Make sure to always save this for the last step. If you put your scene locators on first and then scale up your model, you will run into some issues. So I like to save this for the very end once I know that everything is exactly the way I want it to be. So for my model, I'm going to place a couple scene locators just in various places to show you guys how it works. Say, for example, I want to place one over here at the bottom of the cliff. Let me show you how that's going to work. So first, I'm going to navigate over there. All right, now we're over here at the base of this mountain where I think I'm going to want to film one of my shots. So we need to place our first scene locator. In order to place a scene locator, we are going to use what's called the 3D cursor inside of Blender. So I'm going to pick the spot I want this camera. I'm basically just going to look down from where my camera was at because that's the angle I want. So right here on the ground, I want to place my scene locator. So first, we're going to place the 3D cursor. So how we are going to do that is by holding down Shift and right-clicking. If you don't see anything, you maybe didn't turn your overlays back on. Turn that on. You should see this red cursor being placed right underneath your mouse. So now I've got mine right about where I want it. Now we're going to add something called an empty. So again, shortcuts in Blender, you're going to need to remember them. I'll make sure to make a list in my description below if you want to save that so you can remember all the shortcuts. But this one is Shift A for add, Shift add, and then you're going to come down to empty and click plane axis. And that's going to place what's called an empty onto your scene. It's going to place it exactly where that 3D cursor is, so it makes our life easy. We don't have to keep moving it around. It should be exactly where the mouse hit that object. Now that we have the empty on our scene, we need to do one last step to make sure that Jetset knows this is a scene locator, and that is rename it. So how we're going to do that is come over here to all your layers. It should already be selected since we just created it. Go ahead and double click. This is going to allow you to rename it. And there is a very specific way that we need to name this object. So you're going to start by typing scene, LOC. That stands for scene locator. And then you're going to do underscore. And then now you can call it anything that you want. But you always have to include that scene loc underscore before whatever you're going to name this. So once I have that, I can go ahead and call this, Space of Mountain. Whatever you call it is what it's going to show up as in Jetset, so make sure you name it something you'll remember. Now that I have that scene locator, let's go ahead and add one more. I'm just going to add 2 for this video, but if you want to do more, that's totally fine. Alright, for this next one, I'm going to place a scene locator kind of on top of this hill, looking down into the rocks. I think that's a cool angle. So we're going to repeat the process from before. I'm going to look at the ground where I want it, Shift, right click, that's going to place the cursor. Then we're going to do Shift A for add. Then we're going to go down here to empty, plane axis. And then lastly, we need to rename it. So click on empty, do scene loc underscore, and I'm going to call this hillside. All right, now that you've got the scale fixed, you've got your scene locators in there, your whole model's built, you have officially mastered the Blender. Alrighty, so that's all I'm going to show you guys in this video. If you want to see how to actually put this into Jetset and start filming, and then render it out and throw it into After Effects, that will be in the next video, so make sure you guys are subscribed to see that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.